Ma'am, I think you've wandered into the wrong place. The bus stop is 2 blocks down. The waiter's voice cut through the polished hum of the restaurant like a blade. And honestly, you're stinking up the dining room. So why don't you do everyone a favor and walk yourself back out before I have you escorted? The woman standing at the entrance of Veranda Pierce, one of Houston's most exclusive French restaurants, didn't flinch. She wore a faded, oversized denim jacket with a torn pocket, a pair of cargo pants 2 sizes too big, and shoes that had seen better decades. A canvas tote bag hung from her shoulder, bulging with what looked like rolled-up papers and old folders. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a low bun, and there was a smudge of dirt across her left cheek that she hadn't noticed yet. 83 diners sat in the candle-lit room. Every single fork stopped moving. Every conversation died mid-sentence. A black woman who looked, in the cruelest of words, homeless, was being publicly humiliated by a white waiter who had clearly decided she was an embarrassment to his restaurant. He had no idea who she was. He had no idea whose mother she was. And he certainly had no idea that within the next 48 hours, his entire world, the restaurant he served in and the company that owned it, would be brought to their knees over a single can of Pepsi. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what really happened inside Veranda Pierce that Tuesday afternoon, you need to know who this woman was. You need to know why she looked the way she did, why she walked in alone, and why her daughter would soon arrive in a black SUV with 2 attorneys, 3 security personnel, and the kind of cold calm that ends careers. Her name was Delphine Carter. She was 61 years old, a widow, and a retired schoolteacher who had spent 34 years teaching 5th grade at an underfunded public school in Houston's 3rd Ward. Delphine had raised her only daughter, Imani, alone after her husband Marcus passed away from a heart attack when Imani was just 9 years old. There had been no insurance policy, no inheritance, no safety net. There had only been Delphine, a stack of unpaid bills, and a little girl with serious brown eyes who promised her mother that one day she would make sure they never had to worry about money again. Imani had kept that promise. She had kept it in ways Delphine still struggled to wrap her head around. By the time Imani Carter turned 34, she was the founder and chief executive officer of NovaGrid Solutions, a clean energy infrastructure company that had quietly become one of the most valuable privately held firms in the country. The most recent valuation had crossed $6.1 billion. Imani had been on the cover of Fortune, Time, and Essence. She had been invited to brief committees in Washington. She had bought her mother a 6-bedroom house in River Oaks that Delphine still refused to sleep in most nights, because she preferred the small condo she had bought herself in Sunnyside, 2 miles from the school where she used to teach. But today was not about Imani. Today was about something Delphine had been doing every single Tuesday for the past 11 years. Every Tuesday at 5 in the morning, Delphine put on her oldest clothes, the ones she didn't care about ruining, and she drove her 12-year-old Toyota Corolla to a literacy outreach program she had founded called Books for the Block. She spent the morning hauling crates of donated books from a storage unit into the back of her car. She drove them to 4 different community centers and 2 transitional housing shelters across the city. She unloaded every box herself because the volunteers were always short. She organized shelves. She read aloud to children. She helped teenage mothers practice for their GED exams. By noon, she was usually covered in dust, sweat, and the kind of exhaustion that feels good because it means you actually did something. This particular Tuesday, she had finished her last delivery at 12:45. Her stomach was growling. She had skipped breakfast again. She was driving back toward her condo when she passed the brand-new Veranda Pierce on West Thamer Road. Imani had mentioned it 3 weeks earlier. She had said the chef was a James Beard finalist, that the duck confit was supposed to be unbelievable, that she wanted to take Delphine there for her birthday in October. Delphine had smiled and nodded and said that sounded lovely. But standing at a red light, hungry, tired, with her wallet full and her schedule clear, Delphine thought to herself, why wait until October? Why not just go in and see what all the fuss was about? She had earned a quiet lunch. She parked the Corolla 2 blocks down because the valet line looked too long. She walked up to the heavy oak doors of Veranda Pierce, pulled them open, and stepped inside. The hostess, a young woman in a black dress with a single strand of pearls, looked up from her reservation book. Her expression flickered just for a moment, between professional warmth and uncertain hesitation. Before she could speak, a tall waiter named Brandon Whitlock crossed the dining room in 5 long strides and physically stepped between Delphine and the hostess stand. Brandon Whitlock was 31 years old, 6'2", and had worked at Veranda Pierce for exactly 4 months. He had transferred from another fine dining establishment in the same hospitality group after being quietly disciplined twice for what corporate had vaguely called guest interaction concerns. Translation: he had a documented history of treating certain customers very differently from others. His manager had assured the regional director that it was being addressed. It wasn't. Brandon stopped less than 3 feet in front of Delphine, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted. His arms folded across his crisp white shirt and black vest. The brass name tag pinned above his chest caught the light from the chandelier overhead. He looked her up and down twice, slow and theatrical, the way a man inspects something he has already decided he doesn't want. Then he smiled, not a real smile, the kind of smile that exists only to wound. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back outside. This is a fine dining establishment, not a soup kitchen." Delphine's hand tightened slightly on the strap of her canvas tote, but her face remained perfectly calm. 34 years of standing in front of unruly 5th graders had taught her that the loudest voice in the room is almost never the strongest. She met his eyes. "I'd like a table for one, please. Anywhere is fine. I don't need a window." Brandon let out a short laugh through his nose, the same kind of performative laugh that always seems to come from men who have never been told no. He turned halfway toward the hostess, gesturing back at Delphine with an open palm like she was an exhibit in a museum he didn't want to visit. "Sweetheart, did you happen to see the menu prices on your way in? Our prefix lunch starts at $145 per person. That's before drinks, before tip, before tax. Do you have any idea what that means?" "I do." "Then you understand why I'm asking you to leave." A couple at the nearest table set down their wine glasses. The woman, mid-50s with diamond studs the size of peas, glanced at her husband. He looked down at his plate and didn't meet her eyes. 2 tables over, a group of 3 businessmen in tailored suits had gone completely still. One of them was pretending to read the wine list. The other 2 were watching openly, their faces unreadable. Delphine reached calmly into the inner pocket of her denim jacket and pulled out a black leather wallet. She unzipped it. She removed a platinum credit card and held it up between her index and middle finger so that Brandon could see it clearly. "I have the means to pay. I would like a table. May I be seated, please?" Brandon stared at the card. For half a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, maybe, doubt. Then he recovered, and the smirk came back twice as sharp. "Anyone can carry a card, ma'am. That doesn't mean it's yours. For all I know, you found that in a parking lot." He took a small step closer, lowering his voice to that mock confidential tone that bullies use to make their cruelty sound like advice. "Look, I'm trying to do you a favor here. If I run that card and it gets declined, that's a whole scene. That's embarrassing for you, embarrassing for the restaurant. Why don't you save us both the trouble and find somewhere a little more your speed? There's a Whataburger about a mile down on the right." Delphine did not put the card away. She lowered her hand only slightly. Her voice stayed level, but something in her tone shifted. It became firmer, the way the ground feels firmer right before a building goes up on it. Young man, I'm asking you for the third time, please seat me, or please call the general manager, one or the other. I am the senior server on shift. The general manager is in a meeting. He won't be available for several hours. This was a lie. The general manager, a man named Patrick Lawrence, was sitting in his office 20 feet behind Brandon eating a turkey sandwich and reviewing inventory reports. Brandon knew this. He didn't care. A young busboy named Marcus Reyes, 18 years old, walked past the hostess stand carrying a tray of empty water glasses. He slowed for a half-second. His eyes met Delphine's. He saw the canvas tote, the dirt on her cheek, the platinum card still raised in her steady hand. He saw the way Brandon was standing too close, too tall, too pleased with himself. Marcus had been working at Veranda Pierce for 6 weeks. He needed this job. His mother was sick. His rent was due in 9 days. He kept walking. But his jaw was clenched and his hands were shaking around the tray, and he made a mental promise to himself that he would tell the truth if anyone ever asked. A woman seated alone at table 14 had stopped eating completely. Her name was Joel Vincent, and she was 47 years old, an attorney from Atlanta who had flown in for a real estate closing and decided to treat herself to lunch before her flight back. Joel was black. She had been the only black person in the dining room until Delphine walked through the door. She had watched the entire interaction unfold from the moment Brandon stood up. Her napkin was crumpled in her left hand. Her right hand had already moved to her phone, which now sat face up on the white tablecloth beside her bread plate. She tapped the camera icon. She switched to video. She pressed record. She lifted the phone slightly, angling it so the lens captured the hostess stand directly. She did not announce what she was doing. She did not need to. Brandon, completely unaware of being filmed, leaned in even closer to Delphine. His next words were spoken at full volume, loud enough to carry across the dining room, loud enough for the chandeliers themselves to remember. Look, lady, I don't care what kind of card you've got. I don't care what story you've got cooked up. This restaurant has standards. We've worked very hard to keep the wrong element out of here. So either you walk out on your own right now, or I'm going to walk you out myself. Your choice. Delphine looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then she did something Brandon did not expect. She tucked her platinum card back into her wallet, slid the wallet back into her jacket pocket, and slowly lowered her canvas tote to the floor beside her feet. She straightened her shoulders. She folded her hands in front of her. And she said in the calmest voice anyone in that room had ever heard, "I'm not leaving. Call whoever you need to call." Brandon's neck flushed red above his collar. The smirk on his face cracked at the edges, the way a frozen lake cracks under the first heavy footstep. He had expected her to back down. They always backed down. The 2 times he had pulled this exact move in his previous restaurant, both women had walked out with their heads down, mumbling apologies as if they were the ones who had done something wrong. This woman wasn't moving. She wasn't even blinking. She was looking at him the way his 5th-grade teacher used to look at him when he tried to lie about not doing his homework. He took a sharp step back, breathing through his nose, and turned toward the service station behind the hostess podium. A row of glass tumblers sat beside an open 2-liter bottle of Pepsi that had been left out to refill a customer's order. Brandon's hand moved before his brain finished the thought. He grabbed the nearest glass, 3/4 full of dark soda, the ice still mostly intact. He spun back toward Delphine. His mouth was a thin, hard line. His eyes were narrow and bright with the particular kind of rage that men feel when their authority is questioned by someone they have already decided is beneath them. "You know what?" he said. His voice was low now, almost a hiss. "You want to stand there and pretend you belong here? Let me help you with that." Joel Vincent, sitting at table 14, saw what was about to happen 1 full second before it happened. Her hand tightened around her phone. She did not stop recording. She did not look away. The lens of her phone caught everything. Brandon flicked his wrist. The glass tipped forward. The Pepsi arced through the air in a long brown ribbon and struck Delphine squarely across the chest. The cold liquid splashed up across her collarbone into the hollow of her throat and ran down inside the collar of her denim jacket. Ice cubes bounced off her shoulder and clattered onto the polished wood floor. A dark stain spread across the front of her jacket, soaking through the fabric in seconds. A single drop landed on her left cheek, mixing with the smudge of dirt that had been there since morning. The dining room did not gasp. It did something worse. It went absolutely, completely silent. 83 people stopped breathing at the same time. The soft jazz playing through the speakers suddenly sounded obscene. A waiter in the far corner dropped a teaspoon onto a saucer, and the small metallic clink rang out like a gunshot. Delphine did not move. She did not raise her hands. She did not step backward. Pepsi dripped from the hem of her jacket onto her shoes. Her chest was soaked. Her tote bag lay at her feet in a slowly spreading puddle. She was still looking at Brandon, and her face had not changed at all. Brandon set the empty glass down on the hostess podium with a soft tap. He wiped his wet fingers on a linen napkin he grabbed from a nearby table without asking. He stepped close to Delphine, leaned in until his mouth was inches from her ear, and whispered loud enough for the front 3 tables to hear. "Oops, looks like you spilled something. Now you really need to leave and get yourself cleaned up. Goodbye, ma'am." He straightened. He smiled. He gestured toward the front door with an open palm like a butler showing a guest out of a grand ballroom. Delphine still did not move. At table 14, Joel Vincent's hands were trembling so hard the phone in her grip was shaking, but the lens stayed locked on the scene. Her face was wet. She didn't realize she was crying. She had recorded 11 minutes and 22 seconds of footage. She would record 9 more. The hostess, whose name was Caroline Prout, had both hands clamped over her own mouth. Her eyes were huge. She was 24 years old and had been on the job for 3 weeks. She had no idea what to do. She had been trained to handle reservations, allergies, and seating charts. She had not been trained for this. Her supervisor was the man who had just thrown the drink. In the kitchen, behind the swinging double doors, a sous chef named Renata Holloway had heard the unmistakable wet slap of liquid hitting fabric, followed by the silence that came after. Renata was 38 years old, had worked in high-end kitchens in 3 different cities, and had seen too many things she should have spoken up about and hadn't. She set down her tongs. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked toward the kitchen door and pushed it open just enough to see what was happening. She saw the older black woman standing in a puddle of soda. She saw Brandon Whitlock smirking. She saw the look on the hostess's face. And something inside Renata, something that had been quietly accumulating for years, finally gave way. She let the door swing shut. She walked straight to the back office where the general manager was eating his sandwich. She knocked once and walked in without waiting for an answer. Patrick Lawrence looked up mid-bite, mildly annoyed. Renata didn't speak loudly. "She didn't have to. You need to come out front, right now. Brandon just poured a glass of Pepsi on a woman in the dining room because he thinks she's homeless. There are at least 80 people watching, and I'm pretty sure several of them are recording." Patrick froze. The half-eaten sandwich hung in his hand. He set it down carefully on the wax paper. He stood up. He pulled on the suit jacket draped over his chair. And in the 8 steps it took him to reach his office door, the color drained completely out of his face. Back at the hostess stand, Delphine finally spoke. Her voice was so quiet that the front tables had to lean forward to hear her. "Young man, I would like your full name. I would like the name of this establishment in writing, and I would like you to stay exactly where you are standing until your manager arrives. Do not move." Brandon laughed in her face. The laugh was loud and ugly, the kind of laugh that fills a room and tells everyone listening that the man making it is absolutely certain he cannot lose. Brandon spread his arms wide and turned in a slow half-circle so the entire dining room could see his face. "You want my name? Brandon Whitlock. W as in whatever. H as in honey, you don't belong here. I as in I really don't care. T as in time for you to leave. L as in last warning. O as in out the door. C as in call whoever you want. K as in keep walking. He turned back to her, his chin so high he was practically looking down his nose. Did you get all that, or do you need me to write it on a napkin for you? Delphine did not respond. She slowly reached into the front pocket of her cargo pants and pulled out a phone. It was a basic model in a scratched purple silicone case. The kind of phone a retired schoolteacher would carry. Nothing about it would have made anyone in that dining room look twice. She tapped the screen once, pressed it to her ear, and waited. Brandon snorted. He gestured at her phone with both hands, playing to the room like a stand-up comedian who had already decided his audience was on his side. Oh, here we go. She's calling for backup. Let me guess, your boyfriend is going to show up in a beat-up pickup truck and try to threaten me. Maybe your pastor. Should I be worried, ladies and gentlemen? Two men at the bar laughed. One of them was already beginning to look uncomfortable. The other was laughing too hard, the way people laugh when they're trying to convince themselves that what they just witnessed was funny instead of horrifying. On the other end of the call, the phone rang twice before it was picked up. The voice that answered was warm and immediate, the voice of a daughter who always answers her mother's calls no matter what meeting she is in. Mama, everything okay? Delphine's voice was steady, almost conversational, the same tone she used to use when she would call Imani to remind her to drink water during finals week. Baby, I need you to come to a restaurant on Westthamer. It's called Veranda Pierce. A waiter just threw a drink on me and is refusing to let me sit down. I'm not hurt. I'm not leaving, but I need you to come. There was exactly 1 second of silence on the other end of the line. Then Imani Carter's voice came back. It was no longer warm. It was no longer the voice of a daughter. It was the voice that had negotiated a $400 million federal contract, the voice that had fired 3 vice presidents in a single afternoon, the voice that had once made a hedge fund manager apologize on a live conference call. It was low and flat and absolutely controlled. Don't move, don't leave, don't say another word to him. I'm 15 minutes away. I'm bringing the team. Stay exactly where you are. The call ended. Delphine slid the phone back into her pocket. Her hands were perfectly steady. Brandon was still talking, still performing, still milking the moment for laughs that were no longer coming. So what's the verdict, sweetheart? Is your knight in shining armor on his way? Should I clear a parking space? Delphine looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, yes, you should. Before Brandon could fire back, the swinging kitchen doors opened with a hard bang, and Patrick Lawrence walked out into the dining room. He was 45 years old, balding, wearing a dark gray suit that fit him slightly too tight in the shoulders. He had been the general manager of Veranda Pierce for 11 months. He had personally signed off on hearing Brandon despite the documented warnings from the previous restaurant. He had told the regional director that he could handle Brandon, that he could mold him, that everyone deserved a second chance. He was about to learn what that decision had cost him. Patrick stopped halfway across the dining room. He took in the scene in one slow sweep, the puddle of Pepsi on the floor, the dark stains spreading across the woman's denim jacket, the canvas tote sitting in soda, the ice cubes scattered across the wood. The 80-plus diners frozen in their seats with their phones now openly out, several of them clearly recording. The young hostess crying silently behind the podium. Brandon standing in the middle of it all with his chin still raised, looking proud. Patrick's mouth opened. No words came out. Renata Holloway was standing right behind him. She did not wait for him to recover. She walked past him, crossed the dining room in 8 quick strides, and picked up Delphine's canvas tote bag from the puddle on the floor. She shook it gently to remove the worst of the soda. She set it on the hostess' podium. Then she pulled a clean linen napkin from a stack near the wine station and held it out to Delphine with both hands. Ma'am, I am so deeply sorry. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. Please let me get you a chair. Let me get you anything. A towel, water, anything. Delphine took the napkin and gently patted her cheek where a single drop of Pepsi was still tracking down toward her chin. She nodded once at Renata, and the smallest smile, more in her eyes than her mouth, passed between them. It was the silent acknowledgement of one black woman to another in a room full of people who had chosen not to see. "Thank you," Delphine said. "That's very kind." Patrick finally found his voice. It came out hoarse and uneven, the voice of a man who could feel the floor cracking beneath his feet. "Brandon, my office, now." Brandon turned his head slowly, his expression somewhere between confusion and indignation. "Patrick, you don't understand. This woman walked in here looking like that and started causing a scene. I was just defending the restaurant. I was protecting our reputation, our brand, our regulars. You always say we need to protect the brand." Patrick closed his eyes for a long second. When he opened them, he didn't even look at Brandon anymore. He looked at Delphine. "Ma'am, on behalf of Veranda Pierce, I am profoundly sorry. There is no excuse for what just happened. Please allow us to seat you. Anywhere you would like. The meal is on us, please." Delphine looked at him with the same steady, unreadable expression she had been wearing the entire time. "Thank you, sir, but I'm not interested in a free meal. I am going to wait right here for my daughter to arrive, and I think you should wait with me. 15 minutes is not a long time in the abstract. 15 minutes is a coffee break, a short drive, the length of a sitcom without commercials." But inside the dining room of Veranda Pierce, with 83 witnesses, a manager turning the color of unbaked dough, a waiter standing in the middle of a slowly drying puddle, and a black woman in a soaked denim jacket waiting with her hands folded in front of her. 15 minutes stretched into something closer to forever. Patrick Lawrence did exactly what Delphine had told him to do. He waited. He did not return to his office. He did not try to remove Brandon from the scene. He stood 5 feet from the hostess podium with his hands clasped in front of him, and he waited. He had recognized something in the woman's voice, something he could not name but absolutely could not ignore. It was the voice of a person who already knew how this was going to end. Brandon was not waiting well. He had started to pace. He had loosened his collar. He had run his hand through his hair 3 times. The smirk was gone. The performance was gone. What was left was a man slowly beginning to understand that he might have miscalculated. He kept glancing at Patrick, waiting for some kind of signal, some kind of rescue. Patrick would not meet his eyes. In the dining room, conversations had not resumed. People had stopped pretending to eat. Forks rested on plates. Wine glasses sat untouched. At least 12 different phones were now openly held in 12 different hands, all of them recording. Joel Vincent had quietly slipped a second phone out of her purse and started a backup recording, just in case. The first one was now 23 minutes into uninterrupted footage. Outside on Westthamer Road, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled smoothly to the curb directly in front of the restaurant. A second identical Escalade pulled in behind it. The doors opened in sequence, the way a well-rehearsed routine opens. 3 men in dark suits stepped out first. They were tall, calm, and visibly armed in the way that security personnel are always visibly armed, which is to say not at all, except in the way they hold their shoulders and the way their eyes scan every surface within 100 feet. Then the rear passenger door of the lead vehicle opened, and Imani Carter stepped out. She was 34 years old. She was 5'9" in flats and was wearing flats today, simple black ones. She wore a charcoal pantsuit, no jewelry except a small gold band on her right hand, and her natural curls were pulled back into a low, neat puff at the base of her neck. She carried no briefcase. She carried no purse. She did not need them. 2 attorneys flanked her, a man and a woman, both holding leather portfolios. Behind them came a woman in her late 40s carrying a tablet. That was Vanessa Boudreau, Imani's chief of staff for the past 6 years. Imani walked toward the front door of Veranda Pierce without breaking stride. The security detail moved with her in a loose formation that managed to look both casual and absolutely impenetrable. A woman walking her dog on the opposite sidewalk stopped and stared. A man in a parked Lexus put down his phone and rolled down his window to watch. The front door of the restaurant opened. Imani stepped inside. The temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. That is not a figure of speech. Multiple witnesses would later describe it the same way. The air itself seemed to change pressure. Patrick Lawrence's mouth went completely dry. Brandon Whitlock's face did something strange. It went slack, then tight, then went slack again. He had no idea who this woman was. He had never seen her before in his life, but every instinct in his body was screaming at him that something was very, very wrong. Imani did not look at Brandon. She did not look at Patrick. She did not look at the diners or the hostess or the spreading puddle of Pepsi on the floor. She walked straight to her mother. She crossed the dining room in 12 smooth steps. She stopped in front of Delphine, and for the first time since walking through the door, her expression softened. "Hi, Mama. Hi, baby." Imani reached out and gently took the corner of her mother's stained denim jacket between her thumb and forefinger. She lifted it slightly and looked at it. Then she let it fall. Then she looked up at her mother's face, at the smudge of dirt on her cheek that someone, Renata most likely, had partially wiped away with a napkin. Then she looked down at Delphine's canvas tote bag sitting on the hostess podium, still damp, the rolled-up papers inside warped and ruined. Then she looked at her mother's hands. Her mother's hands were perfectly still. Her mother's hands had never stopped being perfectly still through any of it. Imani turned her head slowly toward Brandon Whitlock. She did not raise her voice. She did not point. She did not move closer. She simply looked at him. And in that single look, every diner in that restaurant understood with complete clarity that they were about to watch a man's entire life collapse in real time. "You are the one who did this." It was not a question. Brandon swallowed. His throat made a small, wet sound. Look, ma'am, there was a misunderstanding. I didn't know. I just thought she walked in and she looked. I was trying to maintain the standards of the restaurant. I was just doing my job." Imani let him talk. She let him fill the silence with his stammering excuses. She let every word he said hang in the air long enough for everyone in the dining room to hear it clearly. When he finally ran out of words, she turned her head slightly and addressed the male attorney standing to her right without looking at him. "David, please get Howard Whitfield on the phone." The female attorney to her left, whose name was Marisol Reyes, opened her portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She handed it to Imani without speaking. Imani took the paper. She looked at it once. She turned back to Patrick Lawrence, who had not moved a single muscle in the past 40 seconds. "Are you the general manager of this establishment?" Patrick nodded. He could not speak. "Then I think you should know exactly who owns the building you're standing in, and exactly what is about to happen to it." The single sheet of paper in Imani Carter's hand was a property ownership summary. It had been pulled from Vanessa Boudreau's tablet during the drive over and printed at a UPS store 2 blocks away in under 4 minutes. The team had done this kind of work before. They were fast. They were quiet. They were thorough. Imani held the paper out toward Patrick Lawrence without explaining what it was. Patrick took it with hands that were beginning to tremble visibly. He looked down at the page. He read the first line. His eyes widened. He read the second line. The color that had drained from his face 30 seconds ago somehow drained even further, leaving him the gray of wet cement. The building at 4847 Westthamer Road was owned by a real estate investment trust called Brightline Holdings. Brightline Holdings was a wholly owned subsidiary of Nova Grid Solutions. The lease on the building was set to come up for renewal in 4 months. The current tenant of the ground floor commercial space, Veranda Pierce Restaurant Group, was operating on a month-to-month extension that had not yet been formalized into a long-term contract. Patrick Lawrence finally understood. He understood with the kind of complete, body-wide clarity that only arrives in the very worst moments of a person's life. He looked up at Imani. He looked at her mother. He looked at Brandon. He looked at the puddle of Pepsi. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Imani turned slightly and held out her hand. David, the male attorney, placed a phone into her palm with the call already connected and the speaker already on. The voice on the other end was male, older, slightly out of breath. Imani, it's Howard. Vanessa said it was urgent. What's going on? Howard Whitfield was 62 years old, the chief executive officer of Brightline Holdings, and a man who had spent the last 6 years answering Imani Carter's phone calls within 2 rings every single time. He was a personal friend of the family. He had been at Imani's wedding 3 years ago. He had hugged Delphine at the reception and told her she had raised an extraordinary daughter. Imani's voice was calm. The dining room could hear every word. Howard, I'm standing inside Veranda Pierce on the ground floor of the Westthamer property. About 30 minutes ago, one of their senior servers, a man named Brandon Whitlock, refused to seat my mother because of how she was dressed. He called her homeless in front of 80 people. He threw a glass of Pepsi on her chest. He told her people like her don't belong in places like this. He did all of this while she was holding a platinum credit card in her hand. He is still standing in front of me right now. There was a long pause on the line. When Howard spoke again, his voice had gone very quiet. Imani, I need you to tell me Delphine is okay. She is unharmed. She is also drenched in Pepsi and standing in a puddle of it on a hardwood floor. Jesus Christ. Howard, I want their lease canceled. I want the month-to-month terminated. I want them out of my building by the end of next quarter. I want it in writing before the end of business today. And I want you to personally call every other Brightline tenant that has any commercial relationship with Veranda Pierce Restaurant Group, and I want you to inform them that NovaGrid will be reviewing all of those relationships in light of this incident. Are we clear? We're clear. I'll handle it personally, right now. Thank you. Imani ended the call. She handed the phone back to David. She did not look at Patrick Lawrence. She did not need to. Patrick Lawrence had already understood that his career, his salary, the mortgage on the 4-bedroom house in Sugar Land, the private school tuition for his 2 kids, all of it was now on a clock that he could hear ticking inside his own chest. Brandon Whitlock, in the meantime, had finally caught up to what was happening. His face went from white to red to white again in the span of about 3 seconds. His hands started to shake. He took a step forward, both palms raised in surrender. Ma'am, please, please, I am so sorry. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know who she was. If I had known, I would never have. I swear to you, I would never have. I have a wife. I have a baby on the way. Please, please don't do this. Please. Delphine Carter, who had not spoken in nearly 20 minutes, finally raised her head and looked at him. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. It was something far more devastating. It was tired. It was the voice of a 61-year-old black woman who had been speaking to men like Brandon her entire life and had finally run out of patience for any of them. Young man, you didn't throw that drink on me because you didn't know who I was. You threw it on me because you thought you did know. You thought I was a poor black woman who couldn't afford to be in this room. You thought I was someone nobody would believe. You thought I was someone who didn't matter. And you were absolutely comfortable with all of that until you found out I had a daughter who could ruin you. That is not remorse. That is calculation, and I will not accept your apology. The dining room was silent. Somewhere near the back, a woman was openly crying. Imani turned her head slightly toward Patrick Lawrence. Sir, I would like you to call the Houston Police Department. I would like to file a formal assault complaint against Mr. Whitlock for the unwanted physical contact involving the contents of that glass. I would also like Mr. Whitlock to remain in this restaurant until they arrive. If he attempts to leave, I will instruct my security team to detain him under Texas civil law, which permits citizens restraint for the purpose of preventing the escape of a person who has just committed a Class C misdemeanor in your presence. Do you understand me? Patrick nodded. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed. Brandon Whitlock, finally and completely, sat down on the floor. He did not faint. He simply sank down onto the wood beside the puddle of Pepsi and put his head in his hands. The Houston Police Department dispatched 2 patrol units to Veranda Pierce within 9 minutes of Patrick Lawrence's call. 4 officers entered through the front doors in single file. The lead officer was a sergeant named Ramon Delacroix, 47 years old, 18 years on the force, a man who had walked into more restaurants, parking lots, and lobbies than he could count for exactly this kind of call. He had seen the inside of fine dining establishments before. He had not often seen them like this. The dining room was still completely silent. 80-plus patrons sat at their tables with their meals abandoned. A young hostess was crying openly behind the front podium. A man in a server's uniform was sitting on the floor with his head in his hands beside a sticky brown puddle. A sous chef in a white coat stood beside an older black woman with a Pepsi-soaked denim jacket. A second, younger black woman in a charcoal pantsuit stood with 2 attorneys, and 3 security personnel arranged behind her like a flying wedge. And the general manager, a man Sergeant Delacroix had met once at a community business meeting 2 years ago, was standing in the middle of his own dining room looking like he was about to throw up. Sergeant Delacroix did not need much explaining. Imani Carter introduced herself. She introduced her mother. She introduced her attorneys. She did not raise her voice. She gave the sergeant a clear, chronological summary of what had happened in under 90 seconds. She gestured toward Joel Vincent at table 14, who was still recording. Joel stood up, walked over, and handed her phone directly to the sergeant. "It's all there. From the moment he stepped in front of her, 28 minutes uninterrupted. I have a second recording on a backup phone." Sergeant Delacroix watched the first 3 minutes of the video in complete silence. He paused it. He looked at his partner. He looked at Brandon Whitlock sitting on the floor. He resumed the video. He watched the moment of the pour. He watched Brandon lean in to whisper at Delphine. He watched Brandon smirk. He stopped the video. He handed the phone back to Joel. "Mr. Whitlock, please stand up." Brandon stood up. He was no longer the man who had crossed the dining room 35 minutes earlier with his chin in the air and his arms folded. He was a man whose entire posture had collapsed inward. His tie was crooked. His apron was stained. His eyes were wet. "Mr. Whitlock, I am placing you under arrest for assault by contact, a Class C misdemeanor under Texas Penal Code Section 22.01. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The handcuffs went on. The metallic click of the ratchet was loud in the silent room. Brandon was walked out of the dining room past the tables he had served that morning, past the customers he had laughed with, past the bar where he had refilled his own coffee twice that day. He did not look up. He did not look back. The front door of Veranda Pierce closed behind him. Through the windows, the diners watched him be placed into the back of the patrol car. Imani turned to her mother. Her face finally completely softened. She put both hands on Delphine's shoulders and looked her in the eyes. "Mama, are you ready to go home? Are you okay?" Delphine nodded. She reached up and squeezed her daughter's wrist. "I'm okay, baby. I just want to go home and take a shower. We're going right now." Imani helped her mother carry the canvas tote out of the restaurant. Renata Holloway followed them to the door. So did Joel Vincent. So did a young couple from Table 7 who walked up nervously and apologized for not standing up sooner. Imani thanked them all. She thanked Renata specifically, and she made sure to get Renata's full name and contact information before she left. Renata did not know it yet, but in 6 weeks she would receive a phone call that would change her career forever. The Escalades pulled away from the curb. Veranda Pierce remained closed for the rest of the day. Patrick Lawrence sent every diner home with a full refund and a profuse apology that nobody accepted. He locked the front doors at 3:30 in the afternoon. He sat in his office for 2 hours and stared at the wall. By 8 o'clock that evening, Joel Vincent had uploaded her full recording to 3 different social media platforms. She titled the post very simply, "Houston restaurant server throws Pepsi on black grandmother, refuses to seat her, calls her homeless. Watch what happens next." The video had 300,000 views by midnight. By 6 the following morning, it had crossed 2 million. By noon, it had been picked up by every major Houston news outlet and 4 national ones. The hashtag that emerged organically over the course of the next 12 hours was 3 words: "Stand with Delphine." By Wednesday morning, Delphine Carter was the most discussed name in the country. Not because anyone had identified her connection to Imani yet. That part of the story would take another 48 hours to surface. Initially, she was simply the woman in the video. A retired schoolteacher who had been humiliated trying to buy herself lunch. A grandmother in a denim jacket who had stood her ground without raising her voice. Reporters camped outside Veranda Pierce. The restaurant's social media accounts went dark, then came back briefly with a generic apology statement, then went dark again. Online reviews flooded in by the thousand, dropping the restaurant's rating from 4.7 stars to 1.1 stars in under 36 hours. The parent company, a hospitality conglomerate called Pier Vance Restaurants, was forced to issue a corporate statement on Thursday morning that satisfied absolutely no one. Brandon Whitlock had been booked, fingerprinted, and released on his own recognizance Tuesday night. He returned home to a wife who had already seen the video. She had already packed a bag and was sitting in the living room when he walked through the door. She did not yell. She did not cry. She simply told him she needed time. Then she left for her sister's house with their 2-year-old son in her arms. When the connection to Imani Carter and NovaGrid Solutions finally broke on Thursday afternoon, the story did not just get bigger. It became something else entirely. It became a national reckoning. The headline broke first on a business news website Thursday at 2:47 in the afternoon. Woman humiliated in viral Houston restaurant video identified as mother of NovaGrid CEO Imani Carter. Within 90 minutes, the story had been picked up by CNN, the Associated Press, Reuters, and every major business publication in the country. The Wall Street Journal ran a sidebar by 4 o'clock. The New York Times had a full feature live by 6. The narrative shifted overnight. What had been a viral video about a single act of cruelty by a single bad employee became something much larger. It became a story about wealth and class, and what it means when a powerful black woman watches her mother be publicly degraded. It became a story about how black women in particular get treated when they don't perform wealth in ways that white service workers find recognizable. It became a story about the dozens, hundreds, thousands of Delphine Carters who walk into restaurants and stores every single day and get treated exactly the same way, except they don't have a daughter who can pick up the phone and end a man's career in 11 minutes. By Friday morning, 3 former employees of Veranda Pierce had come forward to local Houston reporters. Their stories were remarkably consistent. Brandon Whitlock had a pattern. He had been seating black diners in the back of the restaurant near the kitchen for the entire 4 months he had worked there. He had instructed the hostess staff to tell certain customers that the restaurant was fully booked when there were clearly empty tables in the main dining room. He had made comments in staff meetings about what he called the wrong element wandering in from the surrounding neighborhood. He had used a particular slang word for black customers when speaking to other servers, a word the former employees would not repeat on camera but were willing to describe in detail to investigators. 2 of these former employees were black. 1 was Latina. All 3 had complained internally to Patrick Lawrence at various points. Patrick had assured all 3 that he would talk to Brandon and handle the situation. He had not handled the situation. He had not even talked to Brandon. The complaints existed only as informal verbal conversations. None of them had been documented in any official human resources file because Patrick had not filed them. The civil rights attorney Amani Carter retained on Friday afternoon was a woman named Loretta Jamerson. Loretta was 63 years old, had been practicing civil rights law in Texas for 38 years, and had argued 2 cases in front of the Fifth Circuit. She was widely considered one of the most formidable plaintiffs' attorneys in the Southwest. She did not take cases she did not believe in, and she did not lose the ones she took. Loretta filed 2 parallel actions on Monday morning of the following week. The first was a civil rights complaint with the Texas Workforce Commission and the United States Department of Justice, alleging a pattern of racial discrimination at Veranda Pierce, in violation of Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The second was a civil lawsuit in Harris County District Court, naming Brandon Whitlock individually, Patrick Lawrence individually, Veranda Pierce Restaurant Group, and the parent company Pierre Vance Restaurants. The civil complaint sought damages for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of Texas public accommodation laws. The complaint also requested injunctive relief in the form of mandatory anti-discrimination training, the establishment of an independent compliance office, and the implementation of a formal customer complaint system across all 18 Pierre Vance properties. The discovery phase moved fast. Loretta's team subpoenaed Pierre Vance's internal communications going back 3 years. What they found was not just damaging. It was catastrophic. Buried in an email chain between Patrick Lawrence and a regional director named Cynthia Bellwether was a message dated 9 months before the incident. In the message, Cynthia had responded to Patrick's concerns about Brandon's behavior with a single paragraph that would later be projected onto a courtroom screen in front of a jury. The relevant lines read as follows: "Brandon understands the kind of atmosphere we're trying to maintain. Our regulars appreciate the consistency. Numbers are up. Don't rock the boat over things that haven't actually become a problem yet. Things that haven't actually become a problem yet." Loretta Jamerson read that line aloud 3 different times during her opening statement at the civil trial 6 months later. She read it once slowly. She read it again, emphasizing the word yet. She read it a 3rd time, and then she let the silence sit in the courtroom for 10 full seconds before she continued. The criminal trial concluded first. It lasted 2 days. Brandon Whitlock was found guilty of assault by contact. He was sentenced to 30 days in the Harris County Jail, 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service at a civil rights organization, mandatory anti-bias counseling, and a fine of $2,000. His name was entered into the public criminal record system, where it would remain searchable for the rest of his natural life. The civil trial concluded 8 weeks later. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 12 minutes. The verdict against Pierre Vance Restaurants and its subsidiaries totaled $6.8 million in compensatory and punitive damages. Brandon Whitlock was personally found liable for an additional $150,000, which he would never be able to pay, but which would follow him in the form of wage garnishment for the rest of his working life. Patrick Lawrence was found personally liable for $250,000. He had already been terminated from his position 2 days after the incident. Cynthia Bellwether, the regional director who had written the email, was terminated within 72 hours of the email becoming public. The chief executive officer of Pierre Vance Restaurants, a man named Roger Pearson, resigned 3 weeks later under pressure from the company's board. The board itself was restructured. 4 members stepped down. The company's stock, which had been steadily climbing for 2 years, dropped 23% in a single month. Veranda Pierce never reopened. Pierre Vance closed it permanently 4 months after the incident, citing what their press release called an inability to recover from the reputational damage. The truth was simpler. Howard Whitfield had been entirely true to his word. The lease was not renewed. The space sat empty for 11 months. Then it became something else entirely. Imani Carter purchased the ground floor commercial lease outright through Brightline Holdings 6 weeks after Pier Vance Restaurants announced the closure of Veranda Pierce. She did not announce her plans for the space immediately. She did not need to. She had been quietly working on the plans for months, since long before the lawsuit had even concluded. The space would not become another restaurant. It would not become retail. It would not become anything that resembled what had stood there before. The Delphine Carter Center for Community Literacy opened its doors 11 months after the incident. It occupied the entire ground floor of what had once been Veranda Pierce. The exposed brick walls were the same. The Edison bulb fixtures had been replaced with warm, natural lighting. The wood floors had been refinished and polished. The space that had once held 75 linen-covered tables now held bookshelves, reading nooks, computer stations, a community classroom that seated 40, a small commercial kitchen used for free cooking classes, and a children's reading corner painted in colors Delphine had selected herself. Sky blue, sunflower yellow, soft coral, the exact same colors she had been using to paint the reading nook at Books for the Block on the morning everything happened. The center offered free literacy programs for adults, after-school tutoring for children, GED preparation courses, English as a second language classes, financial literacy workshops, and a lending library that allowed anyone in the community to borrow books, laptops, and educational materials without any kind of identification, deposit, or proof of address. The only requirement for using the center was that you walked through the front door. That was it. There was no dress code. Delphine Carter cut the ribbon on opening day. She wore the same denim jacket she had been wearing on the day of the incident. She had not patched the small stain on the inside of the collar. She had not tried to remove it. She wore it the way you wear a scar, not because you are proud of the wound, but because you refuse to pretend it never happened. The local news covered the opening. National outlets sent reporters. Imani gave a single brief statement at the ceremony and then handed the microphone to her mother. Delphine spoke for less than 2 minutes. She did not mention Brandon Whitlock. She did not mention Pier Vance Restaurants. She did not mention the trial or the verdict or the money. She thanked the community. She thanked her daughter. She thanked the teachers, the volunteers, and the librarians who had said yes when she asked them to be part of the center. Then she said one final thing, and the clip of that one final thing was the part that ran on every news broadcast in the country for the next 3 days. I want every person who walks through these doors to understand something. You do not have to earn the right to be treated with dignity. You do not have to prove your worth before you are allowed to take up space in this world. You belong here because you are here. That is the only requirement. And if anyone, anywhere, ever tries to tell you different, you tell them Miss Delphine said you belong. You hear me? You belong. The room erupted in applause. Delphine stepped back from the microphone. She handed it to Imani. She walked over to a small group of children standing near the new reading corner and got down on her knees to talk to them. The cameras did not follow her. She did not want them to. The settlement money Imani had received from the civil suit, all $6.8 million of it, had been redirected before the wire transfer had even cleared. None of it had gone to Imani personally. She had not needed it. $2 million had gone toward the construction and outfitting of the Delphine Carter Center. $2 million had gone toward establishing a permanent endowment for the center's operating costs. $1.5 million had gone to a new program called the Carter Civil Rights Defense Fund, which would provide free legal representation to victims of public accommodation discrimination across the state of Texas. The remaining $1.3 million had been split into 10 equal donations to 10 different Black-owned community organizations in the greater Houston area. The young busboy from Veranda Pierce, Marcus Reyes, had been quietly approached by Vanessa Boudreau 3 days after the incident. He had been offered a full scholarship to the community college of his choice and a part-time job at the Delphine Carter Center once it opened. He accepted both. His mother's medical bills were paid in full through an anonymous donation that he later learned had come from Imani personally. He worked at the center for 4 years while completing his associate's degree, then transferred to the University of Houston, where he is currently studying social work. Renata Holloway, the sous chef who had been the first to walk out of the kitchen and offer Delphine a napkin, received a phone call 6 weeks after the incident from a culinary group in Austin offering her an executive chef position at a new restaurant they were opening. The group had been quietly funded by a Novagrid-affiliated investor. Renata did not know about that connection at the time and would not learn about it until 2 years later. By then, she had already turned the restaurant into one of the most respected farm-to-table establishments in Texas. She kept a small framed photograph on the wall of her office. It was a picture of her mother who had passed away when Renata was 16. Next to that photograph hung a small handwritten note on a folded napkin. The note read, "Thank you for seeing me, Delphine." Joel Vincent, the attorney from Atlanta who had recorded the entire incident on her phone, became close personal friends with both Imani and Delphine. She visited Houston 4 times in the following year. She would later say in an interview that the moment she pressed record was the most important professional and personal decision she had ever made. She would also say that she did not consider it a brave act. She considered it the bare minimum that any decent human being owed another decent human being. She refused to accept any compensation, recognition, or award. She did, however, accept a single thank-you dinner at Delphine's condo in Sunnyside. Delphine cooked. They ate at the small kitchen table. The dinner lasted 4 hours. Brandon Whitlock served 23 of his 30 days in the Harris County Jail before being released for good behavior. He returned to a world that no longer had any place for him. His wife had filed for divorce 2 weeks after the incident. The proceeding was not contested. She was awarded primary custody of their son, who was born 3 months after the trial concluded. Brandon was granted supervised visitation, which he exercised inconsistently because he could not afford the gas money to drive across town and back twice a week. He could not find work in the hospitality industry. He could not find work in retail. He could not find work in any field that required a background check, which in Texas in the modern era is nearly every field. His name returned over 600,000 search results, and the first 20 pages of those results were all about the incident, the trial, and the verdict. He moved out of his apartment because he could no longer afford the rent. He moved into a single-bedroom unit in a complex on the far east side of Houston. He took a job as a night shift stalker at a warehouse that paid him $14 an hour and did not ask questions. He worked there for 2 years. He showed up. He kept his head down. He did not talk to his coworkers, and they did not talk to him. He gave one interview 2 years after the incident to a podcast that focused on stories of public disgrace. The interview was 47 minutes long. He cried twice during the recording. He apologized publicly to Delphine Carter. He apologized to Imani Carter. He apologized to his ex-wife. He apologized to his son. He said he understood now what he had done. He said he wished he could go back. He said he had been raised in a family that had taught him certain things about certain people, and he had never questioned those things until they cost him everything. The interview received mixed reactions. Some people thought it was a genuine reckoning. Most people thought it was too late and not nearly enough. Delphine Carter was asked to comment on the interview by a reporter. She declined politely. She said she had nothing to say to or about Brandon Whitlock. She said she had spent quite enough of her life thinking about him already. Patrick Lawrence, the general manager, found work eventually. He took a position managing a chain hotel in a smaller market in central Texas. He took a significant pay cut. He sold the house in Sugar Land. He moved his family into a rental in a town his children had never heard of. His marriage survived, barely. He gave a brief statement to a regional newspaper a year after the incident in which he expressed deep regret for not acting on the complaints he had received about Brandon. He said he had been a coward. He used that exact word. He said he had chosen his quarterly numbers over his obligation to do the right thing, and he had paid the price, and he deserved to pay the price, and he hoped that other managers in other restaurants would read his story and choose differently. Pier Vance Restaurants survived the lawsuit and the public reckoning, but barely. The company sold off 7 of its 18 properties over the course of the following 18 months. The remaining 11 properties were placed under new leadership with mandatory anti-discrimination training, independent compliance monitoring, and a corporate complaint hotline that fed directly to an external civil rights firm. The new chief executive officer, who took over after Roger Pearson's resignation, was a black woman named Tasha Green. She had been hired specifically for the position. She knew exactly why. She did not pretend otherwise. Her first action in office was to fly to Houston and personally request a meeting with Delphine Carter. Delphine accepted. They had coffee at the Delphine Carter Center for 40 minutes. Delphine never spoke publicly about what was discussed. Imani Carter continued to run Nova Grid Solutions. The company's valuation crossed $9 billion within 2 years of the incident. Imani never used the platform she had been given to talk about the case beyond a single op-ed she wrote for a national publication 6 months after the verdict. The op-ed was titled, simply, "What My Mother Taught Me About Standing Still." It was 800 words long. It was read by millions of people. It is still assigned in business ethics classes at multiple universities to this day. Delphine Carter, who is now 63 years old, still works at the Delphine Carter Center every single weekday. She still volunteers with books for the block on Saturdays. She still wears old clothes when she does it. She still drives the Toyota Corolla, which now has over 200,000 miles on it. Her daughter has offered to buy her a new car 6 times. She has declined all 6 times. She says the Corolla still runs fine. She says it gets her where she needs to go. She says that is the only thing a car is supposed to do. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer before you give it. If you had been sitting in that dining room at Veranda Pierce, watching that whole thing unfold from your table, what would you have done? Would you have looked down at your plate and waited for someone else to step in? Would you have whispered to your dinner companion that what was happening was wrong, but stayed in your seat because you didn't want to make a scene? Or would you have done what Joel Vincent did, pulled out your phone, hit record, and refused to look away? Be honest with yourself. The answer matters. Drop your honest answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about something differently, if it made you feel the way I felt the first time I heard it, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with one person who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Because I have so many more stories like this coming, and I promise you they only get more powerful from here. But before you click away, remember this one thing. One single thing. Take it with you wherever you go. Dignity is not something that gets handed to you by the people in charge of the room. Dignity is something you carry into the room yourself. And no glass of soda, no smirk, no man with a brass name tag on his vest can take it away from you. Not ever. Not if you decide it can't be taken. Be like Delphine. Stand still. Stay calm, refuse to leave, and know that you belong.